tonight, a tribute to Trayvon Martin, talking to our children about race. And I'm really excited about this. The woman rocking the baby back there was supposed to do this program initially, but she went off and had a baby. And so we had to change plans. So Trayvon's unfortunate demise came about, and so what we ended up doing was changing the program to have three fathers talk. And I thought it would be very interesting. I know these gentlemen, two of them very well, one not as well, but I've been very impressed with him. And they all have sons. So I will share with you, starting with Jorge Meza. Jorge, you want to wave? Oh. In 1976, Jorge Meza was born in East LA, the son of two Mexican immigrants who came to the United States in search of a better life. His family moved to Portland in the early 80s after his two oldest brothers got involved with gangs. His eldest brother was sent to the California Youth Authority, and soon after, his other older brother was shot and almost lost his life to gang violence. These events caused his family to move north to Portland. Soon after their arrival, where the Meza family lived in a mostly African-American community in northeast Portland, Jorge's father left permanently after being in and out of the home throughout Jorge's young life. Raised by a strong Mexican mother who is to this day, at 73 years of age, still works 12 plus hours a day, and owns a restaurant on Northeast Killingsworth in MLK named Catalina. It's across from the police parking lot. You know the parking lot there, and it's a bright yellow, good food. Hey, go there. Jorge was also raised by his community, which helped to shape and mold the man he is today. Even though he dropped out of high school, Jorge was inspired by his thirst for knowledge and learning to enroll at Portland Community College, later becoming a part of Portland Teachers Program, which is jointly sponsored by Portland Community College and Portland State University, from which he graduated with a master's in education. For the past 12 years, Mr. Meza has been a teacher in North Portland at Clarendon and Portsmouth Elementary Schools, and currently teaches at Cesar Chavez K-8 school, and you need to pray for him because he's doing discipline half-time. And I would like to say I've subbed in for his class, and his kids love him. His kids love him, even though he's crazy.
Because he's crazy.
Because he's crazy, yeah. Because he's crazy. Eric Swehla was born to educator parents from Bohemian, British, and Norwegian ancestry on a U.S. naval base in the Philippines, where he spent the first year of his life. The family moved to Panama a year later, then to Portland for kindergarten through 4th grade, and finally a small farm 5 miles outside of Newburgh, 5th through 12th. He attended Lewis and Clark, where he met and married his spouse of 26 years, Janet Range, who is a teacher with an MA in Latin American Studies, and now working in education with children being held for lack of documentation. Eric is the proud father of 2 children who went through Portland's Japanese magnet program. His daughter Kaya, who graduated 2 years ago with a BA in International Relations and a minor in Spanish, is now working on an international relationship in Chile. His son Nigel, now a junior at OSU, is majoring in mechanical engineering. Eric has worked as a house spouse and neighborhood babysitter, a teacher's aide in the Yamhill County Migrant Program, and a teacher for Portland Public Schools for 13 years at Clarendon Cesar Chavez K-8 in North Portland, and presently at Mary Reiki Elementary in Southwest Portland. He is an active participant on his school's equity team as part of PPS's Courageous Conversations About Race initiative to get teachers talking about the impact of race in their classrooms and on themselves. He is part of the Oregon Education Association's Committee on Human and Civil Rights, active in local and county politics, a weekend farmer near McMinnville, and enjoys singing, planting trees, playing horn in the One More Time Around marching band, and talking about race. And before we applaud for Eric, I would like to say that Eric is truly what we're supposed to be about. My last year of teaching, Eric came, I retired 2 years ago, and Eric was my next door neighbor, and he came and asked me, there's a seat right here up front. He came and asked me, what did I think? They were getting ready to dismiss a teacher who was a new teacher, and she was the only African-American teacher at the school. Actually, I guess I was just there working part-time, helping him, getting over my teaching withdrawals. And he said, I'm concerned. There are no role models for the black children here at this school. And if she leaves, there will be no black teachers. So he says, I'm thinking about asking for a voluntary transfer so that she can stay here. And he said, what do you think? And I said, well, that's pretty courageous, because when you leave a school, you don't know what you're getting into. It might be a little iffy. But if you're going to walk your talk, then you have to do it. And Eric did that and went over to Riki, which is in Wilson High School District, which is a far cry from Roosevelt High School. So I really think Eric is what we all want to aspire to be. Eric. There's a chair up here. Is that a chair empty? And there's 2 chairs up here at the front. No, that one's mine. Oh, sorry. There's one here. I'm not standing. You guys are cute, but I'm not standing. And so I'm not saying anything though. Okay, Michael Alexander. Michael assumed the role of CEO of the Urban League of Portland in August 2012. The Urban League helps empower African Americans and others to achieve equality in education, employment, and economic security. He serves as the lead executive of the organization, which has served the city and region since 1945. Prior to joining the leadership team at the Urban League, he served as vice president for account management at Regents Blue Shield Blue Cross, where he was responsible for the design and management of Regents-wide account management, retention and purchaser satisfaction strategies, and as well served as the founding chairman of the board of the Regents Foundation. Before relocating to Portland in 2005, he served in a number of leadership and executive management positions with Magellan Behavioral Health, Aetna, is that Aetna or Aetna? Aetna. Aetna Retirement Services, Kraft Foods, Aetna Health Plans, and is president of the Aetna Foundation. Prior to entering the corporate sector in 1988, he served in program and clinical management roles at the West Philadelphia and Charles R. Drew Mental Health Centers in Philadelphia and the Rutgers Community Mental Health Center in Piscataway, New Jersey.
That's the way it's spelled.
Yeah. Mr. Alexander received his BA from Lewis University and his MSS, which I was going to ask, what's that?
Masters in Social Science.
Okay, that's what I thought. From Bryn Mawr. See, I don't live back there. From Bryn Mawr College Graduate School of Social Work. Mr. Alexander is a member of the Academy of Certified Social Workers, a senior fellow of the American Leadership Forum of Oregon, and the proud father of Derek, 36, Shannon, 31, Christopher, 27, and the grandfather of Xavier. Michael Alexander. So the manner in which the program is going to go is that Jorge, who has a son in 5th grade, Jorge Jr., is going to speak first. And then Eric is going to speak. He has Nigel, who is a junior in college. And Mr. Alexander has his grown sons. So I'm really excited to hear what these fathers have to say. And I sent them quite a barrage of questions to kind of cue into and to share with you so that they can tell you what they think about race and what we can learn about. I present to you our fathers.
I'm Jorge Meza. Once again, I love saying my name. It wasn't always that way. You know, I was George in my former life. And to people that know me from the old school, they can still call me George. That's okay. But I think there was something there where...
You have to speak right into the tip of the microphone like you're a rock star. I'm serious, or it won't pick you up well.
I started with my name because it was, we're talking about race. I think my race had a lot to do with me not being able to be who I was in my skin and the skin that I wear today and that I did at that time as a child. I was being in my own personal feeling, kind of subject to a colonization, a feeling of not being worthy to be who my parents named me, which was Jorge. I had to be George now. And so now when I say my name, I say it with pride because that's what they named me. And I loved it so much that I even named my son the same name. And as I speak, I want you to know that I am not the perfect parent. And I don't think there is. But it is my duty to be the best parent that I can be. I didn't have a father. That's hard to say. But I had a mother. I had brothers. And I had a community. I boxed for many years at Knott Street Boxing Club, which is now Matt Dishman. And I had many fathers. I had Lee Jenkins. I had Donnie Davis. I had all these incredible men who taught me things that I wasn't being taught at home because of lack of a father. So now when I have my own child, my own nephews, I feel this duty because too many men in our community are being incarcerated, are being subject to different types of discriminations because of their skin color and their race. Now, when I talk about race, I'm coming from a critical race theory, believing that race is a social construct. And for that, you can read up here, it's just something to give you a little reference, that basically race affects everything we do. And when we talk about being a social construct, what I mean by that is, here in this country, from a young age, as a person of color, you understand that there's an unwritten rule. There's things that come to you that you have to deal with that I don't believe white folks have to deal with. If I go to Mexico, I'm no longer a person of color. Here, from a young age, I was told and I was made to feel as secondary or not the mainstream. And I need to speak to my son about this because this carries a lot of implications, a lot of things that he needs to know about. I remember my son, I took him to the playground and I was talking to him in Spanish because it was very important for me, for my son to honor his culture and who he is, so he feels that his roots are secured and that he has a good sense of himself. And a child that was playing next to him told him, I can't play with you because you guys talk Spanish, you guys are from Mexico. And I told the kid, I was like, you know, bless his heart, he's just a child. I was like, we speak both, it's okay. He said, nah, I'm not supposed to play with Mexicans. And this is, you know, recently. This is not in the 60s, 50s. This was not too long ago. And luckily, my son has a father that has explained these things to him where his own resolve was like, oh, that's okay, I'm going to just go play. I was much more hurt than he was. And that's why we have to continue to have these talks around race with our children, because our children are in a place where we weren't. I see the fluidness of the way children get along nowadays, and it's amazing. But there is still the reality of race and what that carries with it. We're talking about Trayvon. I think about, what if that would have been a black man killing a white child? May it have been different. And I think about my son, because I know that he's going to be pulled over. I know that he's going to be asked certain questions. I know that I have to inform him that he doesn't always need to talk to the police. That might sound weird, but I tell him that. I'm like, mijo, they need to talk to your parents before you talk to them. And that's something that in my community has been ingrained to us. There's been instances where people in my community have called on the police and somebody in their family ends up getting deported. There's a story that's close to me where there was a crime. One of my family members had their house burglarized. And what do the police do? They investigate, end up taking one of my family members to jail. How does that happen? But those are things that happen when you're a person of color. Those are conversations we have to have with children. On top of that, we have to give the children a strong sense of self. And these are my beliefs. This is my perspective. This is my truth. But I really believe that if a child knows where he comes from, knows about great people in his past, and that means all cultures, but especially for Latino and African American youth. As a teacher, I see what goes on. I see who is in disciplinary issues disproportionately. When I was a child, I knew, why was everybody knew where Donald Longhorn was? That was in 1401 Northeast 68. I got it memorized, but I won't tell you why, because it's embarrassing. But that's my truth. But I have to talk to my son about him feeling a strong sense of health, of self, reading him books about different cultures. And besides that, interacting with others, bringing people over, having a Tío Mateo who's African American, and he knows we're not blood related, but he senses that's family. And those are the things that we really owe our children, and especially being that I had a rough past, like many people have. I don't want to use that as a crush, but it's my truth. And I have to tell my son, Mijo, look out. Not everybody's your friend. You need to be careful. But also you have to encounter and know how to deal with everybody. You need to be respectful of other folks, where they come from, their stories. At the same time, as I continue to think about Trayvon Martin and how incredible that is, I have to tell my son that if you get pulled over, you tell him as much as you need to do, and you have him call me, Mijo. Of course, he's only 10, but these are things that I'm telling him right now because I know he's going to face this. It's a reality of today, and it's been a reality for a long time. And sometimes when I speak like this, sometimes people are like, well, aren't you being a little skeptical? Is that really what goes on? It's the truth, yes. Now we talk about these things about race, and this is something that's been constructed throughout time. And when we think about Manifest Destiny, that was race. That was, it was the God-given right amongst the white people who controlled that, hey, we're going to move westward because God told us we got to go. That was, no matter that these brown people are already there, we got to go. And I need to let them know that. Why is it then that sometimes, our people, a lot of times, Latinos, because I can only speak from my perspective, Mexican Americans, a lot of times we don't have the same, socioeconomic levels. It's not because we're not as worthy as others, but there's been a history of things that went on. And I have to tell my son these histories so he doesn't think less of himself, because I think that's the most important thing. It was my thing that I had to deal with. It was the burden of being a brown boy in a mostly white society here in Portland. Now, that being said, in the community where I grew up, luckily I had a lot of role models, and they were mostly African American men. And I learned so many valuable lessons from these strong men. I remember one time going to Pocatello, Idaho on a boxing tournament. And if you've ever been to Pocatello, Idaho, it's an interesting place. And when we went to eat at the Denny's, I see these men who were in good shape say, Jorge, and the rest of you guys, you eat and you don't talk to nobody. And as soon as we walked in the door, everybody looked at us. And it was one of the scariest moments in my young life at that point. These are the things that my son is going to face. These are the things I have to prepare him for. I need to give him also counter perspectives or different ways of looking at things. I want him to know that not all brown people do certain things because we can't speak in generalities. I loved it when with the basketball player from the Knicks, Jeremy Lin. People were like going crazy over that. Why can't an Asian guy play basketball? Of course he can. We're all biologically the same. underneath. But these social constructs, these chains have been put on us upon which race has been the indicator for all kinds of different achievements and lack thereof. So as a parent, I want my son to respect everybody. I don't care if that person has a different point of view. There can be multiple perspectives. And I also never want him to let somebody else define who he is. Because he is my son and I love him and I want him to know that he can be whoever he wants to be. Nowadays, we see we have a black president. I remember a time when if you would have told me that, not even being African American, I would have said, not in my lifetime. And I want my son to have that hope and that belief that he can also one day be president if he wants to be. If he wants to go out and play basketball, that's fine. He don't have to play soccer. He can do what he wants to do because he's my son, but I need to ground him in who he is first because he needs to know himself, his roots, and his culture. And that goes for all folks. When we were giving the introductions, we talked about our sons. Well, I love my son, but my daughter, boy, look out. And that's my baby right there. And this is hard to look at because, like I said, my father wasn't. Thank you. Yeah, that was good. Thanks for letting that one go. Yeah, we're trying to work it out. But I'm not going to continue this cycle. And I'm breaking it. And last but not least, if there's one message that I want or that I would like to portray to you guys or want you to walk away from my speaking is that Cesar Chavez says, preservation of one's own culture does not require contempt or disrespect for other cultures. It's okay to be you. Do you. Be proud of you. Give your children that love and that pride in who they are. But you know what? Don't speak your truth at the cost of somebody else. Let's be respectful of one another and move forward together. Thank you.
That is one hard act to follow.
All right, so reintroduce
Well said.
yourself, Eric.
Thank you so much.
Eric, reintroduce yourself.
All right. My name again is Eric Swehla. I'm a previous teaching, still one of your teaching colleagues, so we're just on different sides of the race, dealing with different populations of kids now. I want to start out just by thanking Donna and the folks that make Race Talks a possibility, and all of you for coming, and because it's your participation that makes us come away with progress and hope for the future. I also want to, I'm just going to say that I'm thankful to share the stage with such incredible people. Thank you so much. It's a real privilege. So, my parents made me who I am. I should give credit to my sisters as well. I got an older sister and two younger sisters. And all my teachers were part of that process as well. My father was a strong character that believed in being Bohemian was something to be proud of. Now that Bohemian actually was a country, so it was a cultural background thing. But then there was also that Bohemian avant-garde nature of just being different, and being proud of who you were. Not in a racial way, but in a strong body and mind of doing things for a reason, and not because Bobby did it or Bobby's family always did it that way. My mother was also a strong figure and continues to be in her commitment to live what she believes. Her views came from a more traditionally religious standpoint, though her views are more fundamentally pragmatic religious views, and I think are
You really get to be a rock star.
ooh, thank you. I think my mom's, There we go. Better.
Is that better?
Sorry about that. I think her religious views are more pragmatic and are more consistent with views, the core values of religions around the world. She pushed me to have faith in the golden rule of doing unto others as you would have them do unto you. And I believe that core value is a central part of our sense of justice in this country. It can be used for peaceful means, but is often corrupted into an eye for an eye kind of do unto others as they do to you mentality that erroneously is used to justify standard ground rules and anticipation of the negative and the right to do to other people no matter what. I think the most important message from my parents was that it was okay to be proud of who I am, but to find that pride in the context of how I use my abilities to do the right thing, regardless of what others around me may be doing or thinking. My father believed that in a religious sense, small r here, it was a core elemental process of his thinking. And I think that has been instrumental in helping me think outside of the box in general, especially now as we talk about race. It's made me feel a little more comfortable in being critical about my own racial thinking, pushing myself at a metacognitive level, if you want to think, me being suspicious of my own thinking about how I think about race in my brain, which is kind of complex to think about, but I really have to push myself to be there because I'm a white male, heterosexual male, and I'm kind of on the top of the heap for power. It's too easy just to go through my life and do what comes easy. I have to push myself to realize that and think about what I'm taking for granted and who I'm taking for granted and the power that I'm using to actually be better off in life, I hate to say. I guess I should also say that my father was committed to crossing social boundaries to connect with people from different backgrounds. That meant that he might notice some Myanmar sailors in downtown Portland wandering through and not knowing where they were, so he'd pick them up and take them back to their dock and then arrange to have them come to our house for dinner, and it got to be pretty fun at our house. Between hitchhikers, foster brothers, unwed mothers, international students, people of color in our church community, the shut-ins, the elderly. When we moved out to Newburgh, making a connection with that lone African-American coach in Newburgh at the time. There's another couple families that have moved to Newburgh in the years since. Native Americans he met. So we tried to, he knew that we needed more of an understanding. When my parents were in Panama, they saw the social injustice. On one side of the woven wire fence was the United States' society that they created in Panama, and on the other side was abject poverty. They saw the problem of that. They wrote to their Congress people at the time and got a letter back that they were communistic, crazy people, and should be thankful for what they had. I've tried to pass these messages on to my son and daughter, but especially my son as we think about how race played a part in the killing of Trayvon Martin, who was another mother's and father's son. But being Nigel's, he's 21 now. I feel, as a good friend once said, you can mix the batter and put it in the oven, and now you just have to watch the cake rise as it is. I think she added that you can put on frosting, and from time to time we do fix up the frosting because it gets bumped or somebody puts a finger through, more often in my house. But for the most part, my kids are who they are, and I just have to watch them. But when we were back
starting our kids in their life, we went to a neighborhood school. I'm a big believer in neighborhood schools. But we pushed to get them into the language magnet program in that school because we knew that the cultural as well as the academic benefits of learning another language were incredibly important. It happened to be the Japanese magnet program in our neighborhood, even though my spouse and I knew no Japanese and weren't really familiar too much with Japanese culture. We also spent a year in Japan once they were in that program, because we said if they were going to learn some Japanese, we wanted to know them to know the academic, not just the academic language of Japanese, but also that to realize that the language is a manifestation of the culture and a window to its inside. So I should say that when I try to think back to more specifically about race, which I've been pushed to do more so in the last 5 or so years with Portland Public Schools Courageous Conversations about Race. I think I may have helped my children learn that their racial background, or also known as skin color, has given them a privileged access to life. But I have not done enough to continue the golden rule in terms of helping them understand the responsibility we have to use our privilege to make things better for people of color. Donna mentioned me changing schools when I saw an opportunity to do so. And in some ways I think, yeah, that was a really good thing for me to do, but in other ways I think that was the easiest thing for me to do. I'm the white male who already gets 70 cents, or who gets more for every dollar than the average woman gets doing the same job. I'm already the white male who gets employed more easily than everybody else. I need to find ways to push myself harder. That was an easy one. I didn't lose my job. I still had a job, I still had my insurance, I still had all the things that I needed to be successful in life. And I didn't really give up anything. When we talk about critical race theory, one of the critiques of the present thinking is that we don't really progress, or we try to put out progressive suggestions or whatever, only if it benefits white people. So there's a little bit of improvement maybe for people of color in some way, but it really doesn't change anything. So maybe I moved schools, maybe it helped some people, but it didn't really hurt me to do that. And I need to find ways to push myself further. My kids are pretty grown, but I as a teacher, I kind of have adopted a lot of your kids. Forgive me if I'm pushing a little too hard on some of them. It's only the beginning of school to get used to it. But I have to push. I think of how in first grade they're still pretty open to viewing their neighbors, the people sitting around them. So I have to push to help them understand how racism has brought us to where we are. I have to push to develop my curriculum to make sure that these kids, our kids, don't just get the standard white-centric stuff that they've gotten before. I have to push myself to learn more about holidays that I'm not familiar with, that different cultures are more familiar with. I think I have to live what I'm trying to preach too. I have to push myself to search for ways in which I realize I'm being racist. The other day I was near the Lowe's in Beaverton, 72nd and 217, hot summer day. And I was coming out and getting ready to go on the freeway, and coming across the freeway overpass, is a man in a three-piece suit jogging across the overpass. Now, there's no houses there. It's just next to a Lowe's parking lot. He's an African-American man. And I start onto the freeway entrance, and I thought, you know, I should have stopped for that guy. And I got off at the next exit and came around and came back and stuff, but he was gone. But why? My response time was too long, too slow. Nobody in a three-piece suit jogs in the summer. I mean, it's crazy. He needed to get somewhere quick. I wasn't going anywhere in particular. I could have picked him up and given him a ride somewhere. But my response time was too slow. Something in me stopped me. I have to ask, was it racism? And push myself to make a better decision next time. And then, I need to share those experiences with my kids. I need to tell them, you know, look, the way I was brought up was good, but it wasn't good enough. I need to tell them I made some mistakes. And I don't want you to look at people and make decisions on who they are, what they need, with the same kind of biased judgment that I've been doing. So that they know that adults make mistakes too and aren't perfect. And that they can raise their own anti-racist expectations for themselves and be inspired to do better in those situations. I think that when I share my own feelings, thinking back about what my own thinking was and how it must have been biased, it brings a reality to not only the white kids, but it helps the children of color understand that at least somebody's trying and struggling with the issues. I haven't had to teach my son how to deal with being racially profiled. Being followed in the store, people panicking when they get in the elevator with him, car doors locking as he walks across the street. I haven't done that. But Jan and I have shared about times when we saw it and failed to act, and have explained what we should have done, and we're trying to do better on that. My big kids were born with white privilege in this system, and so they haven't had to expect to be pulled over for driving with their skin on the way it is. But I'm also really aware that if we don't learn from our present experience and change something soon, it might be a necessary lesson for my children's children to learn when the people of color outnumber the people of European descent here, the white folks. And if we continue the eye for an eye attitude so many white people assert as justice, because if they really want justice that way, it's going to be different in just a couple decades. Part of me is tempted to continue to think down these lines of how I raise my children to deal with problems, because that is what the issue was with Trayvon Martin. But the question of raising our children, or when we're talking about Trayvon's situation, may be to suggest that there was something about the way this child was raised, a minor, and how he acted in that situation, and how it turned out. But I think what's more important is to think about the actions of the adults in the situation. And I say adults plural because the Trayvon Martin case is not just about how the shooter reacted, but how everybody after that reacted as well. I firmly believe that Trayvon acted as a minor in all the maturity or immaturity possible of a minor. And the real question is how we raise the adults in the picture. How as we, as a community, have come to accept the shooting of a minor as a child's fault. In what ways was that consistent with white acceptance of lynching 60 years ago? How did we accept the passing of a law that says it's okay to shoot someone to death if you feel scared in public? And is it really okay for anyone to shoot someone, or just someone who contributes to maintenance of the political status quo? In other words, if the roles were reversed, would it have been different? Which we all know clearly. So we got to work on it. We got to know just exactly how do we develop ourselves to maintain or create what I've been asked to once a week have my children recite as a place that has liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
Well, good evening.
Good evening.
My name is Mike Alexander, and I
Michael?
a little closer.
Rockstar.
Rockstar.
It's close.
I shouldn't sing. My name is Mike Alexander, and I have lived in Portland for just about 8 years. I want to take maybe a minute and give a little more background. My bio was my professional bio, and these gentlemen shared a little more about their family and their upbringing. But I was born and raised in New York City, one of 3 children, born to a mother who migrated from a rural county in Virginia and a father who was an immigrant from the island of Grenada. My brothers and I grew up in Bedford-Stuyvesant, if anybody knows New York City. It was not to be confused with Beverly Hills by any stretch of the imagination. And in some ways, the greatest gift that we had were our parents. I got to see something that many young people today, across many communities, but certainly too frequently in our community, don't get to see, and that's a father coming home every day. And so when we began having discussions around what it meant to be black in the 1960s. Oddly enough, the discussion that I had first was not with my father. It was with my mother. My father came from a black society. My father had this much deference for white people. None. Everybody in his island who did anything was someone of color. If anybody studies the migration of Caribbean Americans to this country, one of the greatest points of tension existed between native-born blacks and Caribbean blacks, because their approach to work, their approach to society, their, quite frankly, approach to white society was very, very different. And it wasn't a matter of right or wrong, but it was their truths. And I've come to understand that there are very few situations in life that are right or wrong when there are 2 people standing next to them. There are parallel truths quite often. But my father's truth was no one was going to restrict or inhibit his ability to do what he felt he was entitled to do as a man. My mother's truth was, when you go down to visit your relatives in Mannequin, Virginia, in that rural county, he has a list of things that you will not do and you will not say, because I want you back here alive. And it was very clear. I'm old enough to remember the signs in public transportation. I'm old enough to have remembered white-only bathrooms and fountains. And I'm old enough to remember Aunt saying, when you talk to people, look down. You know, and oddly enough, that had been taught to me by the nuns in New York City as they were doing their charity work with young black children in the parish that I grew up in. So the issue and the concept of race and how we address that as in our family was one that was dictated by the times. When it was time for me to be a parent, I have to tell you, my oldest boy is 36. I remember the day I teased my ex about it today. I said, I saw him before you did. I was right there in the room, doing everything I could to not faint, but I saw my son before his mother did. And I can remember the moment of wondering what it was that I was going to have to do in order to protect this child. I knew that I didn't know it then, but would life give me the insight, the wisdom, the experience so that I could protect this child? And so when Donna asked me if I would be willing to speak this evening, I said, I don't have young children. She said, but you have children, and you have sons, and you've had this discussion, and what was it like? And I think my first thought was, I don't like thinking about this. Not that you can go through a single day without doing it, but I don't like thinking about it. We are brought back to this place in time in this country because of the tragedy of Trayvon Martin. But I've lived in 8 cities, and I can tell you that everyone had a scenario like Trayvon. Portland had multiple scenarios like Trayvon Martin. This is not new, this is not unique, and this is not isolated to a county in Florida. And so these discussions are discussions that have been had in families, in African American families and other families of color for generations. And I'm so tired of having to continue to have them. So it was very difficult to say, okay, I'm going to have this discussion. But I'm hoping that there is some benefit that comes from it. Because when I've talked to my children, I've had to approach it from the position of life is not fair. And if you live each day believing that it is, you're going to find yourself exposed, at best exposed, and at worst at risk. There are some things that you can't control. My father used to say, you absolutely have no control over what they call you. You do have control over what you answer to. And that is what I've tried to share with my sons. You will be typecast by someone who will look at you and know everything they think they need to know about you immediately before they take 2 seconds to find out what defines you. That is either your burden or your opportunity. My father would say, spend your life making people question the biases that they have. Spend your life engaging with folks so that they will walk out much more inclined to acknowledge their ignorance than their knowledge. And that is something that you have to own personally. When I've spoken with my sons, and I have a daughter, and I was glad that God gave me a son first because I had brothers and I thought I might have a little more of a chance of being a good parent to a boy. When my daughter was born, I was so fearful, and largely because of the pervasive impact of male privilege that would limit her ability to do things that her brothers could do without any concern. What was I going to be able to do around that? And I don't know. And she's 31 today, and she is still giving me opportunities to learn more about what that means, what it means to me to be a male in this society. And I tell people all the time when folks say, I didn't ask for this. It doesn't matter if you ask for it. You have it. You have it. What you do with it is going to be the determining factor. But the reality is, I think I'm a decent guy, but I can live my day without any of the concerns that my daughter has to face every day. And if I can't use that somehow to try to address issues that affect all women, regardless of whether they're my daughter, then I'm simply willing to look at that suffering, I'm willing to look at that inequity and just say, that's the way things are. It's not the way that I want the world that she lives in to evolve. So I've got to own that. And I would say to anybody who finds themselves occupying a privilege to understand that there is a cost associated with it and you're not paying it. Someone else is. And the fact that you're blind to it doesn't mean anything either. Somebody else is paying that. And we have gotten very comfortable with seeing what that payment looks like. Whether it's the education gaps, whether it's disparate economic opportunities, whether it's the issues of public safety, we have gotten very comfortable seeing that played out each day, as long as we can say that we don't have a fingerprint on it. Well, I'm telling you, we all have fingerprints on it. We have handprints on it. And the issue is, do you view it as a burden or an opportunity? When I've spoken to my sons, specifically around some of the questions that Donna presented, what I've had to say to them is, you know, you can be right or you can be alive. You know, now if you want to be right, mouth off. Exercise your rights, point out everything that you believe as being done right or wrong, or find a way to neutralize this situation and get to a higher ground. You can be right or you can be alive. I have told each of them that there is a pose they strike whenever they are pulled over. It is two hands on the wheel. It is looking straight ahead, and it is saying every move that you're getting ready to make. Officer, I'm reaching into my pocket to get my license. Officer, I'm reaching into the glove compartment to get the registration. Officer, can I turn around? And while this may seem to be very pointed and accusatory at police, I'm also someone whose cousin was a police officer in the Philadelphia Police Department who was killed in duty 25 years ago. So I'm not looking at this through a single lens, but I am, however, saying that our young men are an endangered species within our community. And they're an endangered species for reasons that have to do with the perversive impact of racism and institutional racism and deprivation. And I will also say, and it's not popular, they are also a victim of the loss of control that we have had on many of our young men. And I remember Maya Angelou years ago, someone asking her, who is responsible for the challenges facing young African-American males? And she said, look, there are children, and it's our fault. There are children, and it's our fault. The question is, how will we define our? If we are going to look at communities as being clearly delineated and separated from one another, then the our is a very small grouping of people. If we acknowledge the shared humanity that we have, or we're given the opportunity to have every day, then that our becomes a collective responsibility. I am as concerned about the exchange that your son had on the playground as I would be about my son having that exchange, because that's the construct of the world that he'll live in. Every day, we wake up and we have the opportunity to acknowledge what we share as people. When you open your eyes in the morning and you take that first deep breath, you are breathing the same oxygen as everyone else. We then awake and find ways to separate ourselves from other people, from other concerns, from other communities. But we can begin in a place of commonality. how long we remain there, how effective we remain there, and how true we are in being there is an individual choice that we make. And so the Trayvon Martin tragedy for me put my fears on steroids. I was fearful having raised two young males who are men. If you call them out, they are men. They're not going to find a safe place to hide. They're going to find a place to stand up straight. And I'm concerned when someone's fear or their misconceptions can be rationale enough for them to take the assertive act of taking a life. The tragedy, there are multiple tragedies of that incident. One is how we constituted a jury. Jury suppression, voter suppression, all of these things begin to take place. Secondly, and more important than anything else, is at the end of it, the message. What message did we send when not only did we release Mr. Zimmerman, but we gave him back his gun? What message did that send? Not this is an unfortunate misapplication of the law, but what happened here falls within the confines of what is acceptable. And somewhere, the outrage for that has got to be what we think about in the morning when we take that first breath and then decide what safe, insular place we're going to go to. Thank you.